Hello, I'm the 10-minute English teacher. Let's get you exam ready. Today, I'm going to be providing you with analysis from a key quote from Romeo and Juliet. Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. Before we get going, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are plenty of things on the channel to help you understand Romeo and Juliet like an expert. Okay, let's analyse Romeo's quote, oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. Now, the first thing we're going to do is think about the context of the quote, where it appears in the play. Romeo says, oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. This is said in Act 2 by Romeo when he sees Juliet for the first time at the ball at Capulet's mansion. Romeo has fallen in love at first sight. So this is what he says on seeing Juliet. She doesn't hear him say this. He says it to himself and for the audience's benefit when he sees her across the room at the ball. So we now need to think about some analytical things that we can say about this quote. So here's something that we can say. The image of fire in this metaphor, we've got torches burning bright. So this image of fire in the metaphor reflects passion and desire and love, but it also reflects Romeo's impulsive nature. He does things without thinking, and only moments before he was in despair because of his unrequited love for Rosalind. So we've got this really interesting way of looking at Romeo here. We can see him as someone who's impulsive and passionate and isn't really thinking about consequences, or we can see this as a beautiful and poetic moment where he falls in love with Juliet at first sight. Something else we can say about this quote is that Juliet has brought a sense of meaning to Romeo, and this change of perspective is reflected by Shakespeare's use of iambic pentameter. So we've got, oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. We've got this use of iambic pentameter. It's actually the reason that O is there, so that we've got 10 beats in the line to use that meter. So this idea of order has been restored to Romeo's life. It's a completely different change of perspective for him. And he was speaking in blank verse when he was speaking with his friends before the ball. This change of language reflects the change of perspective and the change of attitude in Romeo. So his whole world has changed on seeing Juliet, and that's reflected by this use of form and structure from Shakespeare. Something else we can say about this moment is that Shakespeare later on at the end of the play places the bodies of Romeo and Juliet by a burning torch at the very end. So when they're dead, the page actually leads others down to where Romeo and Juliet are and says, this is where the torches doth burn. So placing Romeo and Juliet's bodies at the end of the play by a burning torch is possibly a callback, an echo to that moment where they fell in love, to add an extra layer of tragedy and make that even more tragic right at the end of the play. Now we can use this quote to make some links to other moments in the play. So right at the beginning of the play in Act 1, Montague speaks to Benvolio about Romeo, and Montague, Romeo's father, says that Romeo locks fair daylight out, so he's been going for long walks in the darkness. So we can say that in Act 1, we found out from Montague that Romeo's been leaving at night for long walks and shutting himself in his room, embracing darkness. So Juliet has brought light into his life. So that contrast of light and darkness, associating Romeo with darkness at the beginning of the play, reflects this huge change in him. When he meets Juliet, she has brought light into his life. Another thing that we can do is we can think about this use of fire here and what it could symbolise in the wider play. Now, at the beginning of the play, we've got Benvolio saying, one fire burns out, another's burning. And we've got Romeo later, when he confronts Tybalt, saying, fire-eyed fury, be my conduct now. That's what he says just before killing Tybalt. So we can say that fire is a symbol for passion, but also acting impulsively, which is Romeo's hamartia, the thing that leads to his downfall. The fact that Romeo acts without thinking is the thing that leads to his death. It's quite interesting that Benvolio says one fire burns out, another's burning. What he's actually saying here is that you cannot have joy without someone suffering, and that is foreshadowing the tragic end to the play. The fact that Romeo says, fire-eyed fury, be my conduct now, reflects the idea that he is being impulsive, but is also making the decision to embrace in that conflict with Tybalt and kill him. That's his own choosing. But those are actions that Romeo is responsible for. He's ultimately responsible for Tybalt's death, in spite of blaming fate and destiny when he says, I defy you, stars. So this is a great quote for us to know. Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. It's a big moment when Romeo meets Juliet for the first time and sees her and falls in love at first sight. But it's also a great quote for us to know because it can be used in many different circumstances when we're writing essays. Well, if we're writing about love, this is a moment where love is explored, Romeo falling in love at first sight with Juliet. If we're talking about fate, well, ultimately they do meet without realising that they're from the rival families, but also, is it fate or is it impulse? Romeo is somebody who has gone from being completely besotted with Rosalind to now being infatuated with Juliet. Is it fate or is it just the impulsive nature of Romeo? If we're talking about family, well, ultimately Romeo and Juliet fall in love at first sight and then agree to marry without the involvement or the consent of their families. And they effectively make decisions that lead to their own downfall. So we can link this falling in love to family when we're talking about those consequences. If we're talking about impulse or doing things without thinking, well, ultimately they choose to marry each other without thinking. They fall in love, and those strong feelings are responsible for them acting without thinking about the consequences or the future. They live in the moment, whereas the adults in this play tend to think about the futures a lot more. If we're talking about youth, well, we can talk about the fact that these two fall in love without thinking about the consequences of their relationship, and they don't involve their family, and they act very, very quickly. They don't really think about the future. Capulet is someone who wants Juliet to enjoy her youth. He says to Paris, "Let 2 more summers wither in their pride. Here we see her right to be a bride." So he wants her to enjoy being young, but also to fall in love, and he's planning her future, whereas Romeo and Juliet simply live in the moment and they get married the very next day. If we're talking about adults, well, we can draw that contrast and talk about the fact that the young people in this play don't think about the future and the adults do. And if we're talking about pride, we can make that link to when Romeo kills Tybalt. He's somebody who's ultimately driven by love, and that's the thing that motivates Romeo at the beginning. But because he's impulsive, he acts on pride, and when Mercutio is killed, he chooses to engage in a fight with Tybalt that leads to his death. That's him acting on pride. Pride and being an impulsive young character are the things that inform Romeo's downfall in the play. Okay, check out the other videos on my channel. I'll continue to add content. Feel free to ask something you'd like to see me cover in the comment section. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share, and keep revising.